is Kakaaki, the African voice.
Alright, welcome back. Good to know that you are still there with us. We did tell you that our focus this Monday is on the economy, how to drag Nigeria out of the technical recession that Nigeria is in right now. And this interview will be coming in two folds, in two parts. We will be taking our first guest from our Lagos Center. Well, last week it was reported that the presidency is planning to send a bill to the National Assembly for the presidency to have emergency power on the economy. This to many Nigerians is a response that those who canvass for Nigeria to get out of recession Nigeria must diversify.
Yes, absolutely, and that this can only be achieved if there is a restructuring of the federation. There is no disagreement as to why Nigeria is in recession that has been blamed on the slump in the price of crude oil.
Well, that is why there is an agreement that Nigerians cannot afford to run a monocultural economy, that Nigeria must diversify.
The move is to diversify. Of course, that has been a slogan for quite a while now, and many eminent Nigerians say this is so because there cannot be genuine diversification without the restructuring of the federation to practice true federalism.
Well, the federal government, just like previous administrations, has rejected the call for restructuring, and its strategy to get Nigeria out of recession is reported to be emergency powers, which it has denied.
Well, in spite of the denial, there is a confirmation that the economic team is planning a bill and policy to urgently reform and some laws to revitalize the economy.
Well, we're going to the details of what the presidency is planning, but we will turn our attention to why Nigeria is in recession and the need to diversify. Can diversification actually occur without the restructuring of the federation, and whether emergency powers is what is required to get the country out of this recession?
Yes, indeed. We will be taking this discussion in two parts. In part one, we will be speaking with the Secretary General of the Lower Niger Congress, Tony Nnadi, who will be speaking on why people are calling for restructuring and whether there can be diversification without fiscal federalism.
Well, in part two, we will be having two economists who will be analyzing options on how to get Nigeria out of recession, and they will also respond to long Nnadi.
All right, let's now join Secretary General of the Lower Niger Congress, Tony Nnadi. He's joining us from our Lagos Center. Tony, good to have you there with us. How is Lagos? We understand some parts of Lagos is experiencing flooding.
Oh, sure. You can say that again. It was a long day yesterday, and a lot of people are trying to get to their place of work this morning. Good morning, viewers.
You came in safe into our studio there in Lagos. A quick one before we go into the main discussion for today. The EFCC said something yesterday, which you are a lawyer first and foremost, so I want you to react to that, the NBA is full of rogues and scrupulous persons. What's your reaction? What's your take on that?
Well, unfortunately, I will have to agree completely with that charge, because my colleagues, I'm talking about 5 administrations of the Bar Association, I have done everything under the sun, from the presidency of Olisa Bakoba to all the subsequent one to the present one, to get them to see that it falls on them lawyers, or rather on we lawyers first and foremost, to help direct both the politicians and all the other stakeholders on the matter of where the source of this corruption is coming from, which we already know is from within the constitution that creates avenues for corruption and protects completely the beneficiaries. So as long as this constitution remains the basis of Nigeria, corruption is hale and healthy. It doesn't matter what anybody says. And if the lawyers will close their eyes to it and keep going from one chant to the other, talking about rule of law, under a forged constitutional instrument, then the responsibility falls squarely on them on what has happened so far. And if the union comes crashing, that responsibility remains with them. That's my take on it.
Charge, that's a collective, that's generalized, and you are a member of the NBA. Does that also put you in that classification from the EFCC?
Everybody can see that some of us are not keeping quiet. We are taking steps, doing practical things to bring down that source of corruption that is this constitution that creates and protects it. So yes, I remain a lawyer. Of course, that generalization will also include me, but the records will be there, except for one who doesn't want to look at all. The records will be there as to who spoke up in the midst of the commotion and who did not.
We'll be talking more about this particular subject matter. That's coming up on Kakaaki, the African Voice, on our Tuesday edition, so don't miss out. We'll be having some lawyers and hopefully a representative from the EFCC join us. But we brought Tony here to talk about the Nigerian economy, the call for restructuring, especially with the call by the federal government that it is really serious about diversification. Tony, you've been talking about the need for Nigeria to restructure, but the government doesn't seem to be so disposed to restructuring at the moment. The government is thinking about using inventive ways to reflate the economy. Do you think that's possible without the clamor for restructuring by some quarters? This argument, it becomes very pertinent because a lot of people would also always refer you back to the pre-colonial, the 60s, and the period where Nigeria was operating a regional system and how it worked so well. Are you also of the opinion that until we get to that level where we restructure, the talk and the call and the clamor for a diversified economy won't work?
Yes. The first task this morning will be to even define the terms. I've heard restructuring, we have to put a meaning to it. I've had a diversification, we have to put a meaning to it. And then the interplay between all of it, in which the government is trying to do, we hear about emergency powers and all of that, you know. First is to say that restructuring simply means, you know, a wholesale jettisoning of the current constitutional architecture, because it has to be replaced by something that takes us back to what will fit into federalism. What we have now is what I would prefer to call inverted federalism. And for the younger generation who may not have known that we're not talking about something that has to be freshly invented. Nigeria went into the union. Nigeria was a union of constitutions. That is the meaning of a federation, a union of constitutions, meaning that units that could have been countries of their own were now coming together to federate, to cooperate, to be a larger union, to be a larger market, to be a stronger defense alliance. By the time the British were packing their bags to go in the 50s, they had to arrange whether the territories they had governed for almost 100 years up to that point will be going off as three independent countries or a union of three constitutions. And that was what carried the day. The western region, the eastern region, the northern region, each with its own constitution, they were the owners of their assets, and it got toppled in 1966. And this was from 1954 all the way, because that was when the decision was taken. And in that period, you could look back and say that was the golden era of the Nigerian Union, because the western region under Awolowo, made so much of strides. First in many things, the eastern region under Emeagwara became the fastest growing economy of the third world of the time. The north under Sir Ahmadu Bello did not fail woefully, because there was this push to also compete, and for everything that was done in the south, he tried to replicate in the north. When they built universities, he built, and all of that. Everybody had their own assets. Those who went for agriculture went, those who went for education went, and all of that. But all those got toppled in 1966 when the soldiers came. First, it was Europe say that in the emergency that was confronted with, that had to get soldiers to replace politicians in government house. But the regions, the structures of the region were left intact. Their assets still belong to them. Just that somebody had to be, the government now became one in which the head of state had to be in constant consultation with, in a supreme military council with the governors of the region, just to bring the situation under some form of control. But problem came, the big trouble came when in May of 1967, General Yakubu Gowon, created 12 states out of the regions of the time to undermine the autonomy of the regions. It was from that point in 1967 that so much of what the regions were doing now became the business of the center. So much of the key assets that drive development were now confiscated by the center. The port in Port Harcourt was the property of Eastern region under Emma Okpara. From the time the seizures began, the hijacking and the seizure, you began to lose the key assets. The oil and gas went in the name of war, as if the war has not ended. It hasn't been returned to date. All kinds of things, and we now have 68 items on the exclusive list in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria that make it impossible for the federating units to work out what will happen in their territories. And it is an attempt to return. Today we have 36 states. More than 30 of them cannot pay salaries anymore. All kinds of things that the federating units could do for themselves are not being done. And Abuja is there sitting hoping to generate electricity for everybody, to tar roads for everybody, to conduct marriage for everybody, and as it is, the thing has not worked. It's never going to work. And the talk about restructuring is to take us back from that wrong route to what can work. And for those who do not understand, these 36 states are a farce. It's only Lagos that can, stand the way it is. The rest will have to be reworked back to something that can work. And if we do not do it, the agitations we are seeing all over the place are just, an aggregation of the various states that were in those regions of that time. If you look at the western side, you see the OPC. I'm just saying that these agitations all over the place roughly represent an insistence of the peoples of those territories to go back to what used to work for them, because what we have now is not working. There's no magic anybody is going to perform to bring electricity except to remove it from the exclusive list. And the foreign investors you want to impress in all the kinds of economic gambles that are going on, they are not. That's not what they are looking for. They want comfort. They want some predictability and all of it. And if you are not going back to the fundamentals that will enable them to risk their investable funds, you're just wasting your time. And that's where we are.
Issue of how Nigeria got into the recession that it has found itself right now. Our focus will be really to how does Nigeria get out of this this situation that it has found itself. Would you agree that part of the problem has been because of the monocultural economy of the Nigerian economy, or is it simply because the cost of oil has dropped in the international market, and that being Nigeria's mainstay has also forced Nigeria into this recession? Where would you say this lies, or is it back to the fact that we need to restructure? Which is it?
A cost-effect analysis, even by the least trained, will show you that there's a tap from which all of that is flowing. Oil prices go up and down from time to time. I remember I went as low as $5 per barrel sometime around Shagari's era. It's not the drop in oil prices that occasioned the current recession for us. Yes, it plays a role, but the biggest culprit, the biggest source of the problem is the fact that there are political disputations, constitutional, disputations, in which those who are supposed to be working together to build an economy are more concerned with recovering their lands and their assets and their freedoms that have been detained under a constitution that was imposed to seize their assets and their rights. Just like the blacks in South Africa, under the apartheid era, there was nothing you were doing in Pretoria to build an economy of South Africa that was of interest to them, because you had seized their lands, their rights, their assets, their lives. And if instead of dealing with that political source of the problem, you cover it underneath, and you're going to throw all kinds of economic theories around the place, you were just wasting your time. The matter of diversification that is now being touted again, you remember it was the same Yakubu Gowon at the height of his glory in the 70s that said that the problem of Nigeria was not money, rather how to spend money. I'm happy the man is alive to see the kind of Nigeria they had built on that kind of a foundation. And the diversification that can work, the beginning of how to climb out of the recession is to accept the nature of the problem, because it's like a diagnosis. If you do not diagnose properly and you go treating, the patient will die. And on this occasion, that patient is Nigeria. Everything from all the sides indicate that the patient is dying. And if the doctors in Abuja, who go around blowing siren and telling stories from day to day, do not come down from their high horse to accept that the source of this problem, is political, and we have to address it, frontally, like Frederick de Klerk did with apartheid in 1990. It takes a broadcast. It takes an admission that this is the nature of what we have, and this is the nature of what we have to do. Everybody will then come to go on what next has to be done. If that is not done, I'm afraid those who are choking in the over-centralized Nigeria are just going to intensify their efforts to assert their right to self-determination, their right to take charge of their affairs, and begin to feed their people and house their people and provide electricity for their people, none of which has happened in unitary Nigeria, none of which will ever happen under this constitution. Corruption can only grow because it is institutionalized and protected by the constitution. That's what we're saying.
Earlier, what even took us to where we are now, the need to ensure that Nigeria remains a united country. There's a school of thought, rightly or wrongly, that says that where we are, why the decision was taken to dissolve Nigeria's regional status and structure at the time and operate the system we are having now was because, the South is at the point was the regions were getting a bit too strong and too stronger somewhat than the center. It was based on that power they had due to the autonomy they had, the economic successes they had. That's what gave people the mind to say they want to succeed from the country. So in a matter to ensure that you weaken them and make them subservient to the center so that the center remains the rallying point of the national unity in the country. That was why they decided, okay, let's dissolve the structure we had at the time. Let's go to a more simpler, broken down, fragmented structure of states which we have at the moment, where resources of these places are more or less controlled by the center. He said something very interesting. States can generate power, for instance, but they can't use them. They have to send them to the national grid. Now, that fear of having a region that is stronger than the center, has that fear been solved? Is that fear still potent? Is it still there? Is that the major impediment we are having at the moment?
A way around it. What we are dealing with is a feudal system that believes in blue blood and red blood, that believes in master and servant. For the same reasons apartheid was introduced in South Africa, the white supremacists and the black nobody. And it is that feudal system that has appropriated the whole country and insisting that it has to continue like that forever. Unfortunately for the proprietors of that system, there is something called the right to self-determination, which entitles those who have been locked into this unworkable Lugadian marriage since 1914 to some self-redemption. All they need to do, like Scotland did in the UK, like the UK had just done in European Union, is to go to a referendum, and that's where some of us who had spent so many years to try to, help everybody, help the system work itself round back to what can work, but who have now given up on that pursuit into arranging where we will fall when we get to the crash. That is to say, the Nigeria that they are trying to keep by force cannot be kept by force. We're no longer in 1960 or 1969. We are now in year 2016. And the right to self-determination, which is what those regions, all those agitations are actually after at this point, is going to overtake all the attempts to keep people here by force. And the meeting point between all of that is to accept that if Nigeria will become a liability, and the kind of toxic liability it has become for a majority of those enclosed in it, of course they will have to bail out. They will find a way to bail out. If it becomes something that is beneficial to them, they will want to stay. And considering the fact that it is their right to be by themselves according to the current UN instruments, I don't think the people in Abuja are aware of this new development. It came in 2007. And if they have a right to be by themselves, and you are insisting that they remain according to the instrument you have imposed, because that constitution, we went to court all these years to say that we the people did not make the constitution, and we are Nigeria because that constitution say we are, but it puts my signature on a document that shackles me, on a document that takes away everything that makes me a human being, and it expects me to continue to obey and salute that arrangement. It cannot be so. It is self-deception. So if we want to keep the union, we must make it, worthwhile for all of the components. If we insist on keeping it the way it is, I can assure you that all this discussion of restructuring may even have been overtaken, because people are already on their way out of the union. Happily, I had Atiku in Kaduna the other day telling his folks that the time is running out on them to insist on anything, that the kind of thing they had insisted on all the while.
Mr. Nnadi, we'll continue this conversation when we come back from Pan-African World. From our news desk, we've been taking a look at how to bring Nigeria out of the economic recession it currently is in right now. That conversation continues in a moment. Utiba is ready to bring us Pan-African World.
This Pan-Africa World, we start from South Africa, where the country's police sources say the Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan may be charged this week for graft. 30 witnesses are said to have been lined up to testify against Gordhan and 3 former officials from the South African Revenue Service. Officials of the NPA did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Police summoned Gordhan this week in connection with an investigation into a rogue spy unit set up in the Revenue Service when he headed the organization, rattling South African markets and spending the rand down 5%. President Muhammadu Buhari has assured the international community that existing and prospective foreign investors of the investment will be safe, fully secured and protected. Speaking at a bilateral meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on the sidelines of the 6th Tokyo International Conference on African Development in Nairobi, Kenya, President Buhari outlined several steps taken by his administration to secure the country and ease doing business in Nigeria. He told the Japanese leader that with the defeat of the Boko Haram terrorists by the military, the attention of the administration is now focused on stopping the destruction of the country's economic assets by militants in the Niger Delta region. To Gabon now, supporters of Gabon's President Ali Bongo and his chief rival Jean Ping both said on Sunday they were set to win a presidential election that has proved to be the most serious challenge yet to Bongo's family's half-a-century rule in the tiny oil-rich nation. The rival sides also traded accusations of fraud allegedly committed during Saturday's vote, raising the prospect of increased tension in the wake of an uncharacteristic ally bitter campaign. Despite the Interior Minister warning candidates that giving results ahead of the official announcement was against the law, Ping, 73, the president's chief challenger, distributed figures showing him easily beating Bongo. Bongo, 57, who first won election after his father Omar died in 2009 after 42 years in office, has benefited from being the incumbent in a country with a patronage system lubricated by all legacies. Gabon's one-round election means the winner simply requires more votes than any other candidate. Well, that's Pan-Africa World. We still continue with our interview. We're looking at restructure or not. To start with us.
Africa, you see. Africa, you Africa, you understand. Africa, you celebrate. On Kakaaki, the African voice. The new spirit of Africa. This is Kakaaki, the African voice.
There with us. We're still on part one of our conversation. We're taking a look at the economic recession, the options of diversification, restructuring, and emergency power. And we have with us, joining us from our Lagos Center, that's General Secretary of the Lower Niger Congress, Tony Nnadi. And he's been speaking on why people are calling for restructuring. And of course, from everything he's said so far, he believes only restructuring can help Nigeria get out of this situation. Tony, you were still talking about this particular matter, and the question now is if the current administration, which has already taken a stand and saying there is no separation as far as Nigeria is concerned, not right now, Nigeria is one united entity and Nigeria will stay as such, does that mean that Nigeria will not be able to come out of recession if it doesn't go ahead to restructure?
Let us establish the linkages and the connections so that everybody can see how the 2 and 2 will give the 4. The matter of restructuring does not, it's a gamut of options. It could be going back to federalism like we have in the United States. It could be going back to regional autonomy or confederation like we have in European Union. It could be going all the way to independence for the units that are so fed up with the rest of the country. So it is a choice that must be consciously made. But the default, that is what will happen if that choice is not made quickly enough, is that those who are choking in the Nigeria that is not working for them are going to just exercise their right to self-determination and may opt for outright independence, like you find in the eastern flank of the country. I don't think anybody is clinking champagne glasses in the southwest either. And having said that, that's to say, because there's a comment I heard about as if restructuring means automatically the dismemberment of Nigeria. No, restructuring simply means going back to being a federation, going back to restoring the autonomy that was taken by people who are still alive. The men who made the decrees one after the other from 1967 to date that became 1999 constitution, creating this unworkable 36-state structure, 704 local government bureaucracies, and then 68-item exclusive list. These are the things that has brought Nigeria to its knees. These are the things that will kill the union if we don't get them out of the way. Having said that, to conclude that if we don't do them, Nigeria will still, go up in smoke. And it's not as if everywhere will burn and the land will fall into the Atlantic. It simply means that just like we had a Soviet Union before, that is now 15 countries or so, we had a Yugoslavia that shed some blood before it became 5-6 countries as we have. We also had Czechoslovakia that peacefully, parted into the ZEC, and these are all the options we can choose from. That's for restructuring. Then between the restructuring and the diversification, if we do not restructure, all the talk about diversification will come to naught. Why do I say so? There is the vertical diversification, there is the horizontal diversification. The one that is suffering more seriously is though they have a common cause. That's the fact that we have failed in both still flows from that over centralization. The vertical diversification could be said to be what you do to add value. For instance, instead of selling crude the way we've been selling for so many years, we could process, and instead of earning $40 from one barrel, we could earn as much as $700 to $1,000 to $1,000 from processed products. And not only are you getting more money, you are engaging your unemployed, the employable hands in the economy. As it is with crude oil, so it is with agricultural produce. You are exporting cocoa at a certain price, and you are buying chocolate, and Ovaltine and all of that from the people who buy your cocoa at next to nothing, at more than 10-15 times the price of what all they've done is to take your material, add value, create employments in their place, and make more money than you who sweat it out in the farm all through. So it is the failure to allow these regional initiatives which Awolowo was doing well, which Emma was doing well, which the North was also doing well at the time, that has brought us to where we lost on that vertical diversification, that is adding value. But the one that has become an emergency is the horizontal, in which you are looking at creating more centers of economic growth. That is to say, regional hubs that could harness what they find in their natural environment into economic buoyancy. And if you have a situation where the center had taken time to seize everything from everybody, for instance, the East has coal that could generate electricity. There's a power plant in Oji River that Nigeria has shut down for so long. Aba is dead, Onitsha is dead, Nnewi is dead. The managers of Eastern Nigeria realized that these cities will require electricity to grow, and they set up the power plant that could run on coal. Nigeria doesn't want electricity. The the proprietors of Nigeria of today do not want electricity in the east. They shut down Oji River. Coal is lying there. No governor can go to take coal to generate electricity because it is on the exclusive list. And as long as you cannot do that, you are not going to have power to do anything that will become an economy in the place. And as it is for electricity, so it is for the road that is called Federal Road. The debt traps all over the place. So it is for the ports that had to be shuttered down for Lagos to function alone. The same water runs from Badagry to Calabar. Why is it that it's only at one point one bottleneck of Lagos that the importers that are 80% from the east will have to function? These are things that were done to undo the territory. And it has spread to all the other places because the over-centralized posts in Abuja have become the source of corruption. And since those who are benefiting from it, that corruption, were the ones who drew the rule books. There's nothing anybody can do. Go to section 81, 82. You will see where the president is required to go to get permission from National Assembly to spend money. And then in the very next section, he's authorized to run government spending money. Just the treasury is handed over to him. As it is for the president, so it is for the governors. If you combine that with the immunity clause that you find in section 308, you discover that the content of the treasury is entirely at the discretionary disposal of those in government house. So where are you going to get the money to do anything for the citizen? So the citizen is on one side of the river, and remember that there is also a section that nullifies the whole of chapter 2 that defines what should go to the citizen. Section 6, subsection 6C, that makes those things that go to the citizen's welfare in the social contract non-justiciable. That is, government does not owe the citizen any obligation for food or shelter or education in black and white in that constitution. So that it's a combination of all of these, that has brought us to where we are. And if we do not brace up and accept that those things cannot work, and therefore remove those shackles so that those who own these assets and who have the capacity to turn them into some form of economic activity can resume, but not as 36 states, not as 704 local government areas, not under this constitution. Nigeria must do what Frederick de Klerk did in 1990 if we are to be discussing Nigeria by this time next year. Mark my words. If we do not accept that.
Look at economic recession, the options of diversification, restructuring, and emergency power.